photo, and I'm going to go through some basic things you could do to tweak the photo before you start working on the editing. And one of them is to make sure that you are cropping the photo in a 5:7 aspect ratio. In order to do that, make sure you are using the crop tool. Let's see if I can see that. There we go, the crop tool. And you have the ratio options up here. Under this, you can tell what ratio you're using, 5:7. Of course, 5:7 is going to be a portrait mode, so you might need to flip the arrows to clear that. And again, before I hit return to finish, I'm going to get this out of the way and save it for later. You can also rotate while in this mode, and that's where you're hovering right over the center line to get this arrow. And once you start dragging the photo, you'll see a lot of grid lines work up. And so basically what I'm trying to do is get this horizon to be as even as I can by hand by just rotating the image, and I'm using that top line as a guide. Now once I'm satisfied with the horizon being level and my image being centered, it's in a 5:7 ratio, I'm going to drag by clicking the image up just a tad to make sure there's a little bit of space on the roots. So as this picture is, I'm considering this a single shot. And you may notice too there's a little bit of a problem there, and I just saw that when I finished the edit. So it filled it for me. That's pretty cool, but I can take that a little bit further, and I'm going to do that in another video. About two things that you could do that kind of expand the use of AI. One you've already seen before, and I'm going to use the selection tool. I'm going to use the lasso, but any selection tool should work. And I just noticed there's people here in the background, so I'm going to draw a little selection around those people and then hit delete on the keyboard. And this is the content aware fill. So it's taking the people out, and then I'm only left with that. What I've done is I've zoomed out of this photo, and I'm going to use a feature that I just discovered today, and I knew it was there, I just hadn't used it yet. It's called Generative Expand. And what it's going to ask you to do is drag the canvas out to be as big as you want this to be. And it's using the grid line for rule of thirds, so I'm going to expand this photo out to really take advantage of that hotspot and create a little bit more space just so you can see what it would look like. So now I have chosen this space to be filled in, and it's going to use AI and information from the photo to try and fill that in to make it look natural. So I'm going to hit generate to see what it does. Generally, and I've been learning this too as I'm playing around with AI, you'll see somewhere here a layer that will add in, so it starts to make your image more complicated if you choose to do this. And also you have variations, and so what it's trying to do is give you the opportunity to see what the three variations look like. I notice this is the first time I've seen kind of a distinct line, so that's not the best expand that I've seen of experimenting with this. But each of these variations have little subtle differences, and none of them are really that good. But I think it's because I expanded it larger than I normally do. If you're not making a huge change to it, it tends to work better than not. But the clouds are pretty good. The sea line's pretty good. It's just this line in the sand that would need a little bit of work, otherwise it looks unnatural. But it's changed the composition of the photo. It's turned this more into a wide angle shot versus a single subject shot. So now it's time to turn this into a black and white edit. I'm going to go over the tools that you'll need to do to get the best out of the photo. You're going to click on filter, and I'm not going to use this camera raw filter because what it'll do is take all the edits that I did from the last time I did camera raw. I want to open up this camera raw filter, which takes me to the tools that I need to use to edit the photo. And there we see our camera raw interface. One of the first things that I'll do is I'll take this color profile and turn it to monochrome or black and white. I think it did the same thing. The first thing I want to point out right here is the histogram. And the histogram is this bar graph right here. And it's much easier to try and visualize what this is doing when you're seeing only black and white, because it deals with value. And it's showing you how many number of pixels are in a specific value. So for the blacks, this is how many, it's like a bar graph, and then it kind of goes down, and then more and more pixels get bright. And at this value, you have the most number of pixels. There's a lot of white sky, but it's not bright white, it's a gray white light. And then it dips down because the brightest whites get fewer and fewer and fewer. Now when you're making an edit for light, you can directly use the histogram or you could use these sliders. They both work. And you'll see I can deal with exposure, shadows, blacks, whites, highlights. They're also all here. So when you're dealing with exposure or any of these things, you're doing what's called a universal edit. So it's editing every single pixel. And I can shift this all the way over to show you that if you're seeing a histogram like that, that's kind of a high key photography. We'll do that later. That is lots of pixels in the bright range. If I shift the other direction, it's lots of pixels in the dark range. So I'm going to get back to 0 and just show what the other ones do. You've probably seen all this before, so I won't take too long. But notice, and I know this was a good photo for dealing with values because there's so many different grays and darks. I knew that I could get a lot out of that. If you're doing contrast, you're kind of splitting the difference between the darks and the lights. I got to bring this back here to get a better look of that. If you're doing highlights, you're dealing with only the highest values and boosting them or bringing the highest values down. A lot of times you could do that edit and see some more details back in the clouds. Shadows is basically you can pull the shadows out so you can see the detail, although you do add a little bit noise when you do that, or go the opposite direction and create the shadows as something more like caves. And then you've got similar features about dealing with the white values, which are all the way on the extreme, and then the black values, which are on the other end of the extreme. And a lot of times I will do something like this because I really like the look of a shadow that conceals part of it and it reveals the form of this. This is a really good example of using the element of form, because through the shadows you can see the twists and the turns and the three-dimensionality of this object. There are two other things I want to point out briefly. One is there's a not color tune, but a black and white mixer. And this lets you deal with just one color. So even though I've changed the photo to black and white, it still knows that there's color. And the color, I can edit once at a time. So I'll show you how that works by just dealing with the blues, because that's the sky. So as I drag the slider, it's only dealing with the original photo that was recorded as blue. So I could take that sky and darken it or brighten it because only that was blue. If there are oranges or yellows, you can do a similar thing. So it's a way to not do a universal filter, but still have an impact on the overall look of the photo. Don't forget that there's also a nice place here that will let you decrease some of the noise if you see that, or add a little sharpening. Generally, if you use these two, if you use one, it's going to affect the other. So the more I reduce noise, the less sharp the image is. The more I sharpen it, the more noisy it tends to get. Just notice that. Then I hit OK. And those universal edits have been made to my photo. Probably should be familiar with is called dodge and burn. It does not mean dodgeball. We're not going to be dodging wrenches, and if you can dodge a wrench, you could dodge a ball. We're actually just impacting the brightness or the darkness of the color. And I just got to figure out where that tool was again. I had it a little while ago. As with all tools in Adobe, you have to click and hold to see what's there, and one of these will find me the dodge. That's it right there. Nope. Dodge tool. Dodge. All right, and with all tools you can change the print size. I'm going to do some really blunt things here. But basically, dodge lightens the image, and it's almost like a brush stroke. You can take that, and what I wanted to do was to really brighten the sand to create a little bit more contrast between the sand and my subject. So I'm going to go around, and every time that you use that tool, it gets lighter and lighter by very small increments. But it's a way for you to, almost like a painter, change that without making selections. Could I do the same thing by painstakingly creating a selection? Yes, I could. And I could deal with that selection as a layer, and I could lighten that up, and that's a great way to do it. But this object right here would be very hard to select well. I don't think that the object selection tool would work. So that is on the left side. You'll see again, I'll do it again. Hopefully it shows this second time. I can see that it's brighter on my screen. There's my dodge tool. I'll get the ocean too, lighten up the ocean. And again, the intent is to help the subject stand out a little bit more. But on the right side, I'm going to switch, and obviously if the dodge tool makes things brighter, the burn tool is going to make things darker. So I'm going to make that brush larger because I'm making really blunt changes to the image. And so the same strokes on the opposite side using the burn tool allows you to darken an area of an image. And so you as a creator, after you've done your universal edits, are going to look at how you can best apply that. And it's really going to depend on what you're after, what you're trying to do, how you're trying to emphasize the subject. And I got to point out, because you can see this is one of those things where if you're not evenly using it, you're going to see darker light areas and lighter areas. In this case, I'm not sure I want to take the time to get into the smaller spaces. I could. If this is my one image that I want to print, I could take this magnification tool and get really, really close, get my dodge tool. I keep forgetting where it was. Get my burn tool and then shrink the brush so that I can get into some of those smaller spaces. And again, over and over and over again until it gets to something that I am comfortable with. But it's not absolutely 100% necessary. But I am asking you to do that. Use both tools to get the best out of your black and white version of the image. Chosen a different subject. This could be considered a single subject, or probably better described as a middle ground subject, because there's more than one thing to look at. But I like it because it has several different colors, and you can actually see, because the colors are very prominent and match to the color wheel, the blues, the greens, and the reds evenly distributed on the value of the histogram. So that color histogram right there is trying to show you the same information we saw in black and white for the red, green, and blue scale. So it has similar things to others. You can make a universal edit here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that, but what I'm going to do is basically skip down to the color options where you can choose tints and temperatures to cool or warm or cool the image. That can have a nice influence on your photo, especially if it's a cool light and you want it to bring a little warmth to it. The other one's the color mixer, and the color mixer simply just identifies each color and lets you change one of three things. Hue, where you're shifting the hue, so I could do this with the reds and show you that I could change the reds towards more of a purple or towards more of an orange. Saturation, which is same as it is for a universal saturation, but it's only going to affect the reds and give it a little more depth. Again, you never want to go so far to where it looks fake, but you're just trying to enhance. And so for this one, and then luminance. Luminance is the brightness, another subtle variation of value. So you have a bright and dark red, and again, you don't want to go so far that it looks unrealistic. So I'm just going to lighten it up a little bit. You can look at it this way too, which allows you to look at all three areas instead of doing one at a time. To me, I think this is a little bit easier for me to work with. Because what I really want to do here is I want to drain out some of the color of the greens and try to desaturate that, because I'm trying to enhance and emphasize the purples and the blues. So I'm going to bring the blues and the purples up. And again, there's other ways that I can enhance those. I can make the purples a little bit darker and make the reds a little bit darker to match. And what I'm doing is basically subtly enhancing just the purples and the reds and kind of straining out the greens. So depending on what you're doing, and a lot of times you need to add a little bit of saturation, especially if the light is really gray and it's soft light and it's washed out. The color information is still there. You can get more of it by boosting it using color. But this is a good universal edit that you can do for any color photo version. So look at the colors that you have, look at the options that you have, and play with these settings until you like what you've done with the photo.